Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. So Revo Health, the revolution in healthcare starts with you. And so in this, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we revolutionize how we think about not only healthcare, but how do we think about our relationships with other human beings, particularly in a healthcare setting, right? And so there's been lots of conversation about this phenomenon that I think is interesting because for over 40 years, this concept or the conversation around critical race theory has been around, right? And so I know that I was formally introduced to it in 1994. I remember it distinctively because it changed how I thought about the laws, the foundations of our country, and so critical race theory. I encourage you to go into it and investigate it on your own. Don't just listen to what people say on cable news. Research it for yourself. But the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people get confused when it comes to talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in workspaces, and primarily for our focus, talking about it in a healthcare setting. And so, to be quite honest, I appreciate the critical race theory conversations. I'm glad people are starting to think about these things. And I'm much more pragmatic in my approach to talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what that means for me is that it's important for us to think about the types of behaviors, to think about the things that, regardless of the winds of change, so to speak, that keep us steadfast on reaching our goal, which is creating those excellent experiences for every patient every day. Right? And so how do we do that? So at Revo Health, we spend a lot of time talking about the central theme of our purpose, which is making sure that we operate with our values intact. And that is integrity, service, quality, innovation, and teamwork. And if you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you'll recognize that there are none of those concepts that are contradictory to our values, right? And so our values become those things that drive us, that continually increase our ability to be effective with our community, with our partners, with their families. And so when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever is happening outside in the world is important for us to recognize, but within the walls of our organization, it is these values that inform us on how we interact with patients, that inform us on how we interact with our coworkers, with our colleagues, right? So whether I'm sweeping the floor at night, I'm cleaning offices, I want to do that with integrity. I want to do that with high quality. I want to do that with a spirit of service, meaning that I recognize the part that I play in making sure that our patients have the best experience. And I recognize that I'm a part of a team, right? Whether I'm sitting in an office behind a keyboard, I recognize that I have to do that with integrity. And so that means that I show up on time, that I leave on time, right? That it recognizes that I understand the role that I play in making sure that we have quality, that we're innovative, that we're doing, that we have effective teamwork, that we know how to manage conflict in an effective way, right? And so when we operate with those values, it becomes a lot easier for us to really think about all of the intersections by which we operate in, both on the patient side as well as our administrative functions. And so when we think about age, ability, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, and class, we know that all of those things are important for us to recognize within the walls of our workplace as well as with our patients, right? And so I can't pick and choose which part of those that I want to discriminate against or which part of those that I want to to honor, I have to honor all of those because the constellation of those things is different for each one of our patients. And so sometimes I'll hear people say, well, what is diversity? What is equity? What is inclusion? Right? And so diversity is recognizing that we have commonalities and differences. So diversity is recognizing that we have commonalities and differences, right? And so if we look at this plant as a metaphor for our patient relationship, we must recognize that both of these plants are very similar. They need some similar things, right? So they need sunlight. They need water. They need a growing medium, right? So that's diversity. Recognizing those commonalities and those differences is what creates this opportunity for us to talk about diversity. So what is equity? And I would suggest that equity has to be paired with equality, right? And so what does that mean, Andre? How do you do that? Well, let's go back to our plants, right? So both of these plants need equal resources. They both need water. They both need sun, right? So we just talked about the commonalities and the differences, and now we're talking about equality. They equally need water, right? They equally need sunlight. They equally need a growing medium. However, what equity suggests is that although they need the same things, the way they need them may be in fact very different, right? And so the cactus versus my aloe plant, how I water them may in fact be very different. One may need to be given water from the top. The other may need to be given water from the bottom, but they both need water, right? So they both need high quality experiences, but they may need them in different ways. And so then recognizing that inclusion is making space, tearing down barriers that prevent each of these plants from getting what they need, right? And so this notion of inclusion is creating space where we can invite, where we can recognize that not only do we have space for these two plants, but we have other spaces for plants because we have some policies, procedures that allow our plants to produce to their highest potential, right? So this inclusion is tearing down barriers so that people can give their very best towards the mission and goals of the organization. And so when we think about this diversity, equity, inclusion work, when we think about what it means to work with intersectionality, the multiple dimensions of diversity, and when we align those with our values, then we get value-based diversity, equity, and inclusion, which may be very different from kind of the social winds of change. And so whatever is happening outside our walls, we need to be informed about that. But we need to recognize that it is our values that drive our behavior, that drive how we think about patient care. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. We look forward to seeing you become as we continue to have these conversations, and we'll see you in the next training. Thanks. Bye.